What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 275. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources. I've got another one with me on the line. He has almost as much skill as a bear riding a bicycle. It's Luis Scott-Vargas.
Hey, everyone.
Hi. Welcome back from Liverpool. How was your trip?
The trip was incredible. I wish I had not lost my last round to Citadel Siege, of course. Why not? But I finished 6-3 in the Grand Prix, so I did not make day 2. But honestly, the trip was awesome. It was the first Grand Prix that ChannelFireball has run overseas. And, the energy and the people there were just amazing. There were so many people who were just happy to be there and happy to play in the event and, happy to talk to me and Josh and Martin and Frank and Travis, all the guys there. And I just heard a lot of, very polite complimentary stuff. The people there were exceedingly polite. That also stood out. And, a lot of people listened to Limited Resources. I had a lot of people come up and talk to me about the show, it was just, overall, the trip was very, very fun. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I got to see a bunch of it over the course of the weekend. It was pretty cool. A lot of coverage this weekend. In fact, there was multiple tournaments happening simultaneously at all times. I had a bunch of monitors going. Speaking of ChannelFireball, they are the sponsors of Limited Resources, and they've got another tournament coming up. This one is stateside. It's Grand Prix Vegas.
Yeah, this one we're expecting to be a little bigger. Grand Prix Liverpool almost hit the cap since, the hall we rented was 1850. Let's just say the cap at Grand Prix Vegas is slightly different. It's 10,000. If we hit the cap there, we will be very happy. But I would encourage everyone, if you have ever thought about going to a Grand Prix, there's no better Grand Prix to go to. Grand Prix Vegas is going to be incredible. There's just going to be a ton of people there. It's going to be a ton of fun. It's not just a Grand Prix. It's not even just a tournament. It's really a giant Magic convention, and it I think has pretty good shot at being the biggest Magic tournament of all time, but potentially as you mentioned before, maybe one of the biggest, face-to-face gaming events of all time.
Yeah, it is going to be a truly epic event. I can't wait. In fact, I've been on some calls and some emails for coverage, and we've got some pretty cool stuff brewing for that too, because it's a unique weekend where there's tournaments happening on multiple continents, on 3 continents at the same time. And, it's going to be one of those things that you just don't want to miss. If you have the means to get yourself to Vegas for a few days, crash on a couch or do what you got to do. But, that is going to be a fantastic tournament. You can find out more about it at grandprixvegas.com. Pre-register, get yourself set up, and come enjoy Vegas and the tournament. Also, Dragons of Tarkir pre-orders are up on ChannelFireball as well. So we're going to be doing set review next week, Luis. Which I still feel like yes,
we're still doing set reviews, huh?
Yeah, we decided to keep doing those. And if you've seen a bunch of cool stuff that you want, you can find them on ChannelFireball for pre-order. We're not going to crack a pack this week. We've kind of left behind the old format, and now we're looking forward to the Dragons, the new set. And we're going to talk about a few things. First, this is going to be kind of the proxy for the rules show. Basically, Luis and I are going to handle it.
There's not much. Proxies were against the rules, though.
This type of proxy we are allowed to do. The rules show for this one is pretty light. There's not a whole lot of new mechanics since we're transitioning sort of on the pivot set of Fate Reforged. And we're going to cover, though, the new stuff and take a look at some of the details on that. And we've also got 3 preview cards for you guys as well. We put them up on lrcast.com yesterday, but we thought we'd go over them here and talk about them too. And then last but not least, we've got a cool survey that one of our listeners put up for the LR community. And we had some thoughts, and to read you some stuff about that, we thought that was really cool too. So Luis, I think that the idea here is we start with the mechanics, because a couple, or at least one of our preview cards includes one of the new and or returning mechanics that our listeners might not be familiar with yet. So if we start with the mechanics first, I think that makes more sense. So the mechanics in Dragons of Tarkir, to start things off, we're just going to go over all of them, but there's a few that are unchanged, so we won't really need to talk about them. And the first one is Bolster. Bolster is back in Dragons, and it's it had a decent showing, I think, in Fate Reforged. I'm not really sure what to make of it for Dragons yet. It kind of depends on how liberal they were with spreading Bolster around. We will not have Outlast anymore, so it'll be a little bit of a different type of a situation with Bolster, but it's unchanged from Fate Reforged. It's still the same thing.
Yeah, and Bolster is one of the mechanics, as most of these are, that Fate Reforged is supposed to be a bridge from, Khans of Tarkir to Dragons of Tarkir. So while we saw the first time we saw Fate Reforged in this current draft format, it did work with Outlast, which, as you said, is now gone. Now, with Dragons out, I imagine we're going to see some Bolster combos there, too.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep my eye on it. I mean, I think it felt like Bolster was, there wasn't a whole lot of it in Fate Reforged. And so
it's pretty light touch.
It was, yeah, and I'm hoping that they get a little more heavy-handed with it here in Dragons. I think it's a cool mechanic. I like that, if you have a reasonable board state, it's pretty tough to interact with. It's not like you can just blank Bolster. And as they showed with cards like Map the Waste, it's a nice thing to tack on to cards that, you might or might not want to play anyway. Like Map the Waste never really found its home, but, I like the fact that they said, well, okay, let's bolster on a rampant growth effect. And I can see bolster being tacked onto many different types of things like that. And I like that. I think that's cool. Okay. So bolster's the same. Nothing different there. Next one, though, is Rebound. And Rebound is actually rebounding from Rise of the Eldrazi for those that were around for that set. Great set. Fantastic for draft. And
one of the best draft formats of all time.
Yeah, it really was. Although it's weird. How big of a factor do you think Rebound was to that?
I think Rebound, I had positive experiences with it. There were some cool archetypes like Kiln Fiend, for those who want to look that up. It's 1/2 that when you play a instant or sorcery, it gets +3/+0 to end of turn. And of course, Rebound double triggers it. It's actually like a precursor to Prowess.
Yeah, it kind of is. Yeah.
Yeah. And there were a couple, there are a lot of good value cards with Rebound. So I like playing with Rebound, and I think it actually did, go into the rich texture that was the Rise of the Eldrazi draft format. So I'm expecting good things out of it here.
Yeah, there was some really cool stuff you could do. Do you remember Surreal Memoir?
Yes, I did like that card quite a bit.
I'm not going to go deep on Surreal Memoir here, but it basically gave it was a potential
regrowth for spells with Rebound.
Yeah, regrowth for spells. So you got a spell back from your graveyard, and then you got to get another one back, and it was actually its own little pet archetype. Like you could build decks around it. I remember John was fond of that.
Of course, Rebound. Now that we're talking about it, when you cast a spell with Rebound, you exile it. Then next turn on your upkeep, you cast it again.
That's right. So that's what Rebound does. It can come in different forms. It is going to be the mechanic for the blue-white Ojtai clan. So it's going to be in blue and white. Before we saw it in red as well. I know a lot of people were going, oh my gosh, are they going to bring Stagger Shock back? And Stagger Shock was 2 in a red instant, does 2 damage to a creature or player with Rebound. And I think that caught a lot of people's eyebrows up because they were like, wait a minute, there are Megamorphs and Manifests floating around in this set. We'll talk about Megamorph in a few minutes. But a lot of two toughness creatures rolling around in a card like that could really do a lot of work. But it looks like that's not the case, as it's just going to be in blue and white. So the way Rebound works is if you cast a spell with Rebound from your hand, instead of putting it in your graveyard, you exile it as part of the spell's resolution. Normally when a spell resolves, it goes to the graveyard, but Rebound specifically says that it goes into exile instead. Then, at the beginning of your next upkeep, you can cast that spell again without paying its mana cost. Few things to consider here. If the spell doesn't resolve, the Rebound won't happen. It will just go to the graveyard. So if it gets countered, via a counter spell, or if all of the legal targets for it become illegal targets, it will just fizzle and go to the graveyard with no effect, and the Rebound won't ever happen.
Yeah, that's a very relevant point.
Yeah,
because a lot of the counterplay against powerful Rebound spells is getting rid of your opponent's creature if they're using it like a positive Rebound spell, or getting rid of your own if it's a removal spell. Like there are bounce spells are particularly effective. When they go to Stagger Shock your creature and you bounce it in response. That was one way to not get 2-for-1 as badly.
Yeah, and you do what you got to do for that. Obviously, you wouldn't be thrilled to have to make that play, but it's often better than getting hit by a Rebound spell twice. If the spell gets exiled, but so you play a Rebound spell, it resolves, instead it gets exiled, and then at the beginning of your next upkeep, you can't play it. It could be anything. whether there's no legal targets for it or whatever. If you can't play it, it just stays exiled. You never get it. It doesn't come back the next upkeep or anything like that. It's just gone forever. So that's something to consider too, is that if you do have a rebound spell that requires, like, let's say a target, that's your opponent's creature, for example, and they've only got one creature, and you play the rebound spell, it goes into exile, you pass the turn. If they don't play a creature, you're not going to get the second half of that rebound. And, well, you know, sometimes that can be okay, and sometimes it can't, but it's just something to be aware of.
Definitely.
Use a reminder. What kind of reminders do you recommend, Luis?
Well, I asked again on Twitter, actually, when the first couple cards got revealed. You can't put the card on top of your deck. People used to do that sometimes when Rise was around, but you actually can't do that.
You're just not allowed to within the rules, or?
Yeah, because it's too close to being like an actual game action. You can't put Magic cards on top of your deck that aren't supposed to be there.
Right.
So don't do that. Definitely don't want to forget, because with our new trigger rules, your opponent's not under any obligation to remind you. This was not true when we last saw this ability. So right now, if you cast a spell with Rebound, then forget about it. You know, that's too bad.
You can also just forget about it because it's not coming back ever.
Yeah. So what you'll want to do is generally just put whatever reminder you would use now on top of your deck, like dice, a pen, you know, some sort of, you know, one of those Funko Pop figurines, whatever it is you want to do.
You have Derek staring at you.
Exactly. So that way, when you go to draw your card, if you did forget, you'll be like, what is this thing? And then you will then rebound your spell. Though I have seen people say like, why is there a dice on top of my deck? And they just take it off and draw their card.
I know. Yeah, like, I heard a
you
really
didn't pay
funny
for your slaughter pack.
Yeah, exactly. I've actually seen or heard a really funny story about that. I can't remember who told it to me, but I think it was at the Pro Tour, and it was like, some guy's friend, when pacts were legal, and the pacts, of course, are those free spells that you have to pay for during your upkeep, and if you don't, you just lose the game. So not the kind of thing that you want to forget. And like you said, a lot of people would put a dice or something on top of their library to remind them, hey, during your upkeep, you got to pay this mana or else you just lose. And apparently he kept just sliding the card from underneath the dice, you know, just like working around the dice and drawing his card and losing. And he became very frustrated by this. So the solution he came up with was he went to the pet store and he bought one of those hamster balls, you know, those clear plastic balls you can put your hamster in and they run around the house like pushing it around. And he cut it in half. So he made this little like dome to go over his deck that was clear plastic. And he would put that over his library. And that way, when it came time for his draw step, if he went to reach, he would just, you know, hit the plastic and be like, aha, I need to pay for my pack. And apparently it worked.
Yeah.
Perhaps extreme.
That is probably a little more than I would recommend, but I would recommend using some sort of notification. This is the same thing that I've said many, many times. You don't worry about looking foolish when you do stuff like this. What's way more foolish is making a mistake because you don't want to look foolish.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that comes up a lot. I remember at a Grand Prix seeing someone activate a Mutavault, then realize, and I could see from looking at them, they realized they should not attack with Mutavault, then they shrugged and attacked, and lost the game. And afterwards, you know, I'm like, hey, why did you attack with that Mutavault? I could see that you didn't want to, that you knew that it was a mistake. They're like, yeah, but I'd feel real dumb if I activated it, then just pass the turn. It's like now you should feel much dumber now.
Yeah, after having just given the game away for fear of not looking dumb. Yeah, that's bad. So one thing about Rebound that comes to mind, it works well with Prowess. It'll trigger Prowess when you cast it, and then on your upkeep, it'll get cast again, and it'll re-trigger Prowess for any Prowess creatures you have. Now, the downside to this, if you want to call it one, is that there's no actual Prowess creatures in Dragons of Tarkir, so you'll have to make do with the ones from Fate Reforged only. And, you know, when we're talking about the draft portion, remember, it's going to be Dragons, Fate. So that means that only 1/3 of your card pool even has the ability to give you Prowess creatures. So it's not going to be a dominant thing in the format, but it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I like that Prowess is getting some support, because that was my favorite deck to draft in this format and the previous format. And now, you know, we've got a different way of drafting. And, you know, honestly, that is, I think, part of what the whole purpose of this block structure is, this draft structure, is that you're getting a similar thing but with a twist. And we're going to see how that plays out. I obviously have not done any Dragons drafts yet, but seeing how the kind of the new take on prowess, how that plays out is going to be interesting.
Yeah. All right. Next mechanic is also a brand new one. It's called Exploit, and it's quite straightforward. It is an optional enters the battlefield trigger, and it simply says you may sacrifice a creature when blah 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 enters the battlefield. You don't have to. If you don't want to, you can just play your creature and say go, and it's okay. If you want to, though, there's a few things to keep in mind. First thing, you can sacrifice the creature itself. If you want to sacrifice your exploit creature, you can do that. And the reason why you would do this is twofold. One, well, you just might want to sacrifice a creature for value. There's a bunch of random creatures that don't mind going to the graveyard or replace themselves or whatever. But more importantly, these exploit cards, they give you a benefit when you exploit. They will often have pretty profound effects too. I mean, you are sacrificing a creature, you're giving up a lot, and they give you quite a bit back, it seems. The type of effects that we've seen are like to give a creature -3/-3 until end of turn. I was like, whoa, that's really strong. And then some of the rares have some kind of
like a demonic tutor,
like demonic tutor, like searching your library for any card you want and putting it in your hand. But you have to get up to the rare and mythic rare level for that kind of stuff. But still, this is definitely going to be something that's going to challenge you as far as decisions go, because it could get easy to just say, oh yeah, I'm always just going to exploit because this is a good ability. But there will be times when you don't actually want to sacrifice and you just want to play your creature for what it is and say go. And that's going to be, I think, the big skill test thing for that is making sure that you know sort of what the baseline is for each of these exploit cards, and then when it's time to break from that. Yeah,
and most of the exploit cards we've seen so far basically give you a card back. -3/-3 kills a creature, so that's a card. Search your library for a card is clearly a card. But trading a creature that you spent mana for a card is not always going to be, exactly line up. Like the Demonic Tutor one is a good example of that. So yeah, I wouldn't assume that you're always exploiting, but you're going to do it a fair amount of the time, I would say. One thing to mention is that you do choose whether to sacrifice when the ability resolves. So, So for like the -3/-3 one, I'm pretty sure the way it works is you play it and you choose a target, and then your opponent has to decide whether they want to do anything. And then if they don't do anything, or they do, you can then decide to sacrifice a creature.
Ooh, that would be really good.
Yeah, so I'll have to actually read the cards. I mean, we haven't played with the cards yet, so.
Right. But one of the keys here as well is that, like you said, it gets sacrificed as the ability resolves. And that means that the ability itself doesn't target the creature as well that you are choosing to sacrifice. So, there is a window, because there is an ability that goes on the stack for your opponent to kind of mess with your creatures. But they can't interfere with the process of this resolving once it's already there. Meaning, one thing they could do is the exploit ability goes on the stack and they bounce your worst creature to try to entice you to either keep your exploit creature as is or to sacrifice one of your better creatures. They can do that beforehand, but you always get that information. It's not a situation where you like play a creature with exploit. The exploit ability goes on the stack and you're like, okay, I'm going to target my worst creature with it. Does it resolve? And then your opponent's like, I'll kill your thing, and you don't get to say. It doesn't work like that. No. When it resolves, you sacrifice the creature and then the thing happens.
Yeah. And actually reading the exploit cards, actually the way they're worded is when, this creature, whatever the exploit creature is called, exploits a creature, then you do the thing. So that gets around what I thought it might have been worded earlier, which is like with the Butcher that gives -3/-3. Basically, you play the Butcher, the exploit trigger goes on the stack, you choose whether to sacrifice a creature. If you did, then the ability goes on the stack targeting a creature to get -3/-3.
Good, that makes good sense.
So that's the best gameplay. So that is good. So it's not like the old like Lightning Rift where you targeted a creature when a card got cycled, and then when the ability resolved, you chose whether to pay or not. So your opponent had to like make decisions not knowing whether you wanted to actually do it.
That sounds bad.
Whereas here, they'll know whether their creature's getting -3/-3 before they decide whether they want a giant growth.
Which is the least you could do is let them know that you're about to kill one of their things.
Right. But so, yeah.
It does increase the risk on our end though, right? Like we have to actually sacrifice the creature to put that ability on.
But I think that's fair. You sack a creature and then they decide whether to giant growth or not. I think it would feel much, much worse if you played this, targeted their 3/3, they giant growth and you're like, all right, I'm not going to sacrifice a creature.
Yeah, no, that'd just be terrible.
Yeah, so Exploit does seem like it's fairly straightforward, though, despite all the words we just said.
No, yeah, I think it is, too. I think the main things to consider are, do you actually want to sacrifice the creature? Make sure you're making that decision and not just going into autopilot mode. And then the other thing is that just understanding that it doesn't target your creature. So your opponent, if you're at the pre-release or whatever, and they try to pull some shenanigans about like, okay, well, in response to you doing that, no. If it's resolving, you get to just sack your creature and get the ability.
Yep. And, I think one way to read Exploit creatures is mostly like they're at the very least spells that do the thing they say. So
right, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, at the very least, like the Butcher, 4 and a black for a 3/3, you can just all sacrifice it to give a creature -3/-3. So sorcery speed -3/-3 for 5 is not the worst option to have, especially since it does do more than that.
Yeah, I like that. That card's one I definitely have my eye on. I'm kind of excited for that one for the set review. All right, next is Dash, and Dash is back. It's the same as Fate Reforged, though, so we're not going to spend any extra time going over it here. We will be talking a little bit more about Dash in a few moments when we get to one of our preview cards, but it's back. Dash is here still, and I like Dash. I thought Dash was pretty interesting in Fate Reforged. I'm kind of excited that it stayed back. I think its alternate casting costs create a lot more diverse decisions than you get in just normal, and it's weird how early in the game one of those decisions can really, really matter. I've had people, decide to dash out creatures for extra damage earlier in the game, and basically never come back. Right? Like they decided on an early turn to dash, and they never get that tempo back again, where they start to fall behind on board. And sure, they've got a few extra points of damage in, but they never were able to get caught back up on the board state, which is of course the most important thing in Limited is the board state. But at the same time, Dash gives you this thing where, your top decking or the combat math seems to be clear, and you go, your opponent goes down a certain path to try to kill you in a couple of turns and leave themselves open, and a Dash creature can just blow that wide open. So yeah, I think Dash is cool. I don't find it particularly like exciting. Like I'm not like, oh, Dash is so exciting and interesting, but I think it's like very cool to have in the format. I'm pretty glad it's still there.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing some slightly more interesting Dash cards, just because it just felt like that the power level on the Dash cards that we saw before was low enough that they didn't have a ton of impact. Like Goblin Heel Cutter was quite good. I mean, that was an awesome card. I'm not saying they should all be quite that good, right. But the fact that Alicia's Vanguard and Mardu's Shadow Spear and some of the other ones are just these cards are just not that strong. So that ends up making Dash look weak, even though Dash itself is not a bad mechanic. I mean, there's plenty of strong stuff you can do with Dash.
I wonder if they can make like a huge Dash creature.
Yeah, that could be pretty cool. Or maybe like a Dash creature that makes it like cheaper to dash other creatures. That would be awesome.
All right. Next so there's two more mechanics that we have in Dragons of Tarkir, and they're both new. One of them a lot more new than the other one. But still similar actually to what you were saying before, how they kind of look back a little bit. So the first one is called Formidable. And Formidable is an interesting one in that it's one of these mechanics that cares about something, right?
Unlike Marshall.
Care about everything. Think of things like Metalcraft. These are the type of things, Domain, if you go back a little ways. These are the type of abilities that say, if something is true, then something else happens. Ferocious is like this too. And in this case, Formidable cares if you control creatures with power 8 or greater, which is huge. I mean, that's a lot of power. Now, in a mid to late game board state,
and just to be clear, that's combined power.
That's right. So let's talk a little bit about this. So this is the signature mechanic for the Red-Green Atarka clan, and the effects will vary. All of the cards care about you controlling creatures with power totaling 8 or more, but the thing that you get as a result of that is going to vary quite a bit. Let's see. So one of them that we can use as an example is one that I actually tweeted about because it's like the angriest Elmer ever. It's called Stampeding Elk Herd. And it's 3GG for a 5/5, which is that's what it is, just straight up vanilla test, which by the way is quite nice. And then, but it's got this intervening if clause. If you control creatures with power 8 or greater, well, actually, does that even count for this one, Luis?
Yeah. So when you attack, the ability triggers.
Okay.
And it will only trigger if you have eight power or total or greater total to begin with.
Right.
So if you attacked with just Stampeding Elk Herd, it wouldn't trigger because you only have 5. But let's say you had Stampeding Elk Herd and a 3/3. You'd attack with both, it would trigger. And then it still actually checks on resolution.
Yes, it's called an intervening if, and this is one of those
kind of more interesting than it sounds.
Weird actually judge things. But like Louis said, so basically these type of effects have 2 different checks. One of them is, should I trigger? And in this case, if you have Formidable, in other words, if you've got creatures totaling power 8 or greater, it will trigger. And in this case, you get a bonus on your other creatures. Let's see, creatures you control gain trample. So that's what it's looking for. So it triggers when you attack, and it says, so at first it looks and it says, do you have 8 or power? Yeah. Okay. So it goes on the stack. Then it goes to resolve, and it also will check again to see if you've got the 8 power or not. And that's what an intervening if does. It's kind of this weird rules thing where it will only trigger in some circumstances if certain conditions are met, and it'll also only resolve if those conditions stay met. And in this case, Formidable says you got to control the creatures with power 8 or greater.
Yeah, that's for some of them. Some of the creatures have like activated abilities that you can only activate if you have Formidable.
That's right.
And in that case, it just happens. Like, you can only use it if you have this, but if you ever have it and then activate it, it doesn't matter if you become, unformidable.
That's right. Yeah. So if you've got one of those and you put that activated ability on the stack, it's happening.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, you're good to go. So there's 2 different ways, to look at these, and we're going to have to make sure that we keep them in mind because they are handled differently, the triggered abilities versus the activated abilities. But the main thing that we want to look at from a bigger picture perspective here, Luis, is the fact that, Formidable's a thing. It basically cares that you have a big, burly board state.
Yeah, it also, it's funny because it does overlap with Ferocious, obviously, because it's caring about having a lot of power with the creatures, but it does it in a slightly different way, which is a little harder to track on board. And especially if you're used to Ferocious, you do have to pay attention that, enough 2/2s and your opponent will become formidable. It's not see if they meet this one condition, which is have one creature of power 4. It's what is our total power of creatures? And that does make things a little bit more complicated.
Yeah. The thing that jumps out to me about Formidable, it seems pretty cool, is, we talk about the quadrant theory on this show quite a bit. And one of the pretty important quadrants ultimately is when you're at parity with your opponent. And a lot of time, the way that parity ends up expressing itself in Limited is there's a standoff where people are playing creatures, but neither has profitable attacks or maybe just minimal profitable attacks. So the game is looking like it's going to stay in a similar state for a long time. It also sometimes comes down to both players have no creatures or very few. And that's also a common board state. But like I said, pretty often at parity, it's when there's a big stall out. And it looks like Formidable is going to really benefit the person who has Formidable cards in the stall out, because it's pretty trivial to get up to 8 power. If you've got 3 or 4 creatures on the battlefield, and if you have any more than that, you're kind of almost already at 8 power anyway, just by default, even if they're 2/2s. And so I think that's interesting because, we haven't seen all of the Formidable cards yet, but looking forward to them, I am curious to see if they kind of give each of these things a big bump up in the parity part of the quadrant theory. Stampeding Elk Herd kind of doesn't. It doesn't really change it, but I could easily see Formidable cards that could, grant evasion or pump power or pump toughness or do all different types of things that could help break out a stall like that.
Yeah, and the way these stalls tend to work also is because they're so favorable for the defender, when you both have a bunch of creatures, the person who attacks is generally the person who puts themselves at a disadvantage because now the blocking player gets to choose, all the good blocks.
Yeah.
So that is why, you will end up with 8 power, I think, a lot of the time in situations like that. And having a cool Formidable card that, maybe all your creatures get Death Touch or something that doesn't seem outrageous.
No.
To think about.
Yeah, but I'm curious. I'm going to keep my eye out for stuff like that. Otherwise, my initial impressions of Formidable, I mean, I don't want to be like, I feel like it feels a little win more as a mechanic just because like you've already got to have, a Formidable board state. I mean, you've got to have 8 power. Like that means you haven't been messed with too much, and, I mean, sure, I can construct 8 power board states that aren't that impressive, but for the most part, it means that you've played creatures, you've curved out, you've kind of emptied your hand out a bit. And to me, it's like, is this the thing that just sort of pushes you over the top? Or is this something that actually has like a place, kind of where we want it? Again, like it's hard to imagine that Formidable would help you get out from being behind because it's hard to imagine being behind if you've got that kind of a board.
Right.
But, and then ahead, whatever, I don't really put a whole lot of stock in the is good when you're ahead camp, but this one really does seem for me earmarked for the parity scenario. So that's the thing I'm going to be keeping an eye out for.
It's going to depend a lot on what the games end up playing out like and the card design, but I agree with you. Without knowing much more, it is going to be hard to peg Formidable as like a huge game changer. We're going to have to see. Maybe the format, again, is designed with this in mind, but cards that don't work when you're behind basically ever, or at least it's very, very rare, and cards that, you don't need when you're ahead, that doesn't leave a ton of game space to play around with, because a lot of close games aren't close and you have 8 power. That's just not a very likely occurrence. So.
No, that doesn't happen that often. All right. One more, new mechanic, though I kind of put an asterisk after new because it actually is a lot like
this is probably less new than Rebound is for most people.
Yes, for sure. So it's called Megamorph. And I want to preface this by saying it's Morph. It's Morph. It's the same. If you know what Morph is, if you've played Dragons of Tarkir, you know what Megamorph is. The only difference between Megamorph and Morph is that when you pay the Megamorph cost, which replaces the Morph cost, to turn a creature face up from being a face down 2/2, is it gets a +1/+1 counter. Now, it's funny because I'm actually just kind of conflicted about Megamorph on a few levels. On one hand, I'm excited. Morph is back. I'm in. I really like Morph from Cons, and the fact that it's in Dragons is great. I think that's fantastic. I think the name is not good. When I first read Megamorph, my expectations went pretty high. I was thinking, oh my God, like what happens? Like it turns into a dragon with, some ridiculous stuff.
Well, some do, yeah.
Okay. But I'm hoping for, when I see Megamorph, I'm thinking like huge, right? Like something ridiculous.
If you had a test and it said, what does Megamorph mean? And one of the, there's A, B, C, and D, and one of them was morph with a +1/+1 counter. You would not be picking that one.
Exactly. And
you'd be picking morph with 5 +1/+1 counters, or morphs into a 7/7 or something.
Yes. Or becomes like, I want to see like when you morph it Wrath of Gods, or, just some like huge spell that's like, wow, mega. But instead it's like
4 times and you win the game.
Right. But instead, what we have here is a +1/+1 counter. Now, here's where the conflict comes in for me, though, because that's fine, whatever. It's just the name. I'm not really that hung up on it. And so I'm more interested in what the mechanic actually does. And even though it sounds huge and ridiculous, and it's easy to look at +1/+1 counter and be like, oh, that's kind of lame. It's actually not. A +1/+1 counter is a big deal in Limited. Basically, it's the difference between a turn of mana. Like if your creature sits on the battlefield at whatever you cast it for, and then it has a +1/+1 counter on it, it's as if you skipped ahead a turn and cast it. It's like casting a 6-drop for 5 mana, etc. A +1/+1 counter, I think, is one of the easiest things to overlook in Limited, but it's one of the most subtly underrated things that you can do. Anybody who's played recently any of the cards that have Bolster 1 or Hunt the Weak or something like that, you're just like, my creature is just bigger than what my opponent's doing at this stage of the game. And that lets me either attack into their creatures with impunity, or block and eat their creatures. And that's just a huge deal. So Megamorph, actually has a pretty big upside. Maybe it's a little oversold with the word mega, but it is actually pretty big. A few rules things to consider for Megamorph. So like I said, it's morph. You can pay it. You can pay 3 mana, 3 colorless mana, and play it face down from your hand as a 2/2 colorless, nameless, abilityless, etc. morph. We know what that is. Everybody's used to those. In fact, if you use those little morph overlays from Dragons of Tarkir, you're going to use those here too. You don't even need to change that. It's all the same. And one interesting thing though, is that when you do pay the Megamorph cost to flip it up, you get the +1/+1 counter, and it flips up all in one fell swoop. As we know, morphing and megamorphing doesn't use a stack, and it can't be responded to. It just happens. It's one of those weird things in Magic where this is the best way that it worked, so it just happens. And we got used to that in cons. Your creature flipped up, and there's no stack abilities or anything like that for flipping it up. Now, it gets a little interesting here, though, with Megamorph, because you might think, well, when do I get the counter? Does it flip up, and then there's a trigger that goes on the stack that says, when this thing flips up, I get a +1/+1 counter. And then maybe they can kill your creature before the counter comes on it. And the answer to that is no, they can't. It's all part of the Megamorph ability resolving. And so when it flips up, it will already have the counter on it, and it will just happen. So the +1/+1 counter going on kind of gets looped in and lumped in with the rest of the Megamorph stuff. That all falls under that can't be responded to, just happens type camp.
Yeah, and it's, again, this is like exactly what I was talking about before. This is the bridge between cons and dragons, where we had Morph, then we had Manifest, which is still around, obviously, because Fate Reforged is still part of the draft format. And now we have Megamorph, which is Morph with a twist. I mean, no better way to describe it than that.
Right. And that's what it is. So it's actually pretty simple. But I think the cards are going to be good. I think one thing that we can certainly expect is that the Megamorph costs are probably going to be a bit higher than the Morph cost. Getting that counter has to come with some type of tax on it. And so we're probably going to see the cost to flip up go up a bit for Megamorph. But they very well may be worth it. Because it does add this cool twist to it, right? Because now you've got a few different versions of the creature that you can play. You can play it as a 2/2 for 3 colorless like you can a regular morph. You can flip it up or play it face up. And if you flip it up, you get the counter, but if you play it face up, you don't. And that's interesting.
Yeah, this is one of the differences, is because they're actually paying you to go through the whole Megamorph rigmarole, you actually will Megamorph, play the creatures face down more often than you would. Because late game, when you have enough mana, you're going to play a Woolly Loxodon face up because it's just more mana efficient. It costs 7 to play it face up. It costs 9 to play it face down, then flip it. Well, if that was Megamorph, yeah, there are plenty of games where you're just going to be like, all right, well, I'm going to play this face down.
Exactly.
And especially since a lot of the designs we've seen so far give you an extra bonus, like it cares that the power is greater. The +1/+1 counter really matters. Those are the cards that I would expect to see played face down, even when you can't flip them right away.
Yeah. So for me, I just hope that there's a lot of these. The fact that it has this new name and it's not just regular morph makes me wonder if they were more sparing with it than they were. Because, obviously in Dragons of Tarkir, morph was like the headliner mechanic. It was the most important thing in the set, I think, as far as mechanics go. It was really the glue. And I'm really curious to see if we see, because remember, Dragons is a big set, so we can actually compare it to cons somewhat straightforwardly. And I'm really curious to see how many Megamorphs we get versus how many morphs we got. My assumption would be we'd see fewer, but I don't know if that's true or not.
We're going to see at least twice as many.
That is definitely not the case. They would all be Megamorphs. The whole set would just be Megamorphs. Okay, that's going to do it. Wait, I had an edge case.
Is that it for tonight? We're done?
No, we're not done yet, buddy. You still got a little more to go here. Hang in there.
No, we got plenty more interesting stuff to talk about. I don't know why Marshall's trying to quit.
All right, this was the edge case. Remember, we've got Manifest in this set too. In Fate Reforged, in this block. And what that means is sometimes you're going to have Megamorph creatures that are turned face down from Manifest. And if you find yourself in that position, you have to remember that the only way you get the +1/+1 counter on your creature is by paying a Megamorph cost.
Yes.
If you remember, Manifest allows you to pay, its converted mana cost, just whatever its mana cost is in the upper right, to turn it face up, or any Megamorph or Morph costs you can choose. But if you do flip it up for its mana cost, like say that that's cheaper or whatever than the Megamorph cost is, you won't get the counter. So keep that in mind if you do happen to, manifest down one of these Megamorphs. If you want the counter, you got to pay the Megamorph cost. You got to say that, and you got to pay whatever it asks to do. And I think, a couple of months into the format, we'll probably get used to just putting the counter on there whenever we un-Megamorph something. And the time when you have it manifested and do it and just assume the counters are going to be there, that's when it's going to get you. So don't fall for that trap.
Yeah. Usually you think you're getting away with something when you get to flip something up for its cost when it's cheap. But in this particular case, you should go through the process of Megamorphing.
That's right. Okay, so let's talk about our preview cards, Luis. We've got 3 preview cards for limited resources this time, which is great. And they're pretty cool, so let's just dive in here. The first one is, I think, my favorite of the 3. It's called Karsi Deceiver. And there's a link, but you can go to lrcast.com to see the artwork for these 2. It's pretty cool art. But anyway, Karsi Deceiver is 1 and a blue for a 0/4 Naga Wizard.
I like this already.
Which is like not good, right? You wouldn't play an 0/4 for 2 mana.
Maybe you wouldn't.
Yeah, I would not. That's correct. By the way, it's an uncommon. We got 2 uncommons and a common, and this one's an uncommon. So again, from the vanilla test perspective, not too exciting, but it's got a nice ability. So you can, and remember, this is a blue card, kind of weird. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, but you can spend this mana only to cast face down creature spell, pay a mana cost to turn a manifested creature face up, or pay a morph cost. And that does cover Megamorph or Morph.
Yeah, so this is a mana elf, or in this case, a mana naga, in a color that normally doesn't get it. Of course, blue does have a rich history of getting, very specific mana, like the Vidalcan Engineer from back in Mirrodin days, original Mirrodin of 1 and a blue for a 1/1 that taps for 2 colorless that you can only use, or 2 colored mana of any color actually that you can only use to cast or activate artifacts. This is the same kind of thing.
I've never seen that card. That sounds pretty sweet.
I love that card. I drafted so many of that card.
I bet.
But basically, you're paying for a decent blocker, but you're also paying for a mana accelerator if you have enough cards that have Megamorph when you're first playing them, or Manifest to turn them face up. So it's certainly not tap, add 1 colorless, end of story, because that there clearly are some heavy restrictions. You can never cast actual spells with this, for example. But what it does do is it gives you a card that can block reasonably well and a way to accelerate in a color that again does not normally get it, which does make it more interesting.
Yeah, I like the idea of it. I mean, a lot of the decks that I had been drafting in the format before it's going to rotate over were decks that would probably use this card pretty well. One thing that, now that you bring up that old card that you just mentioned, that is actually maybe a little concerning, is that this actually does only add colorless. Thinking back to the old morphs, we had like 3 color morphs. The Megamorphs, I'm assuming, are going to be either 1 or 2. Maybe it's not that big of a deal for the Deceiver, but it wouldn't be too bad if you could add colored mana to help flip up your Megamorphs too, I suppose. Maybe that would be too good. I don't know. But I like the idea of playing this as your 2, leaving a respectable blocker down. I mean, it's not great. It has 0 power. So it's not like, even though it can block, it's never actually eating anything. It's just sort of holding back a 2-drop or something for a while, which is okay. And then you get to start kind of powering out these Megamorphs, which, like I was saying earlier, if they end up being pretty expensive, this is the type of thing that can really get you ahead on tempo. A few things that I noticed about it, though, Luis, that, I don't know, maybe weren't so great, is that if you want to cast a face down creature spell, well, you got to tap it, and that has to happen on your turn. So it's not doing any blocking duty then, which is a little bit of a bummer. Makes you kind of decide one or the other for a turn when you want to start using it. Now, when you want to start turning creatures face up, it can block and then turn a creature face up. So that's not so bad. But you know, the other thing is like, I just don't know if this thing is worth it, because on one hand, I like the sequencing of, playing a 2-drop that can block and then using the mana for later to help get you ahead. But the sequencing I don't like is playing it on turn 2 and then wanting to play, a face down creature on turn 3, like a Megamorph. And this doesn't like help you with that. It's just sort of like, it doesn't have that sort of 1-2 punch that you get where, say you play a mana elf, like a Llanowar Elves.
Yeah, you're not turn 2ing any of these cards.
Yeah, you play one of those, and then you get to play a 3-drop on turn 2. And when you start thinking of those sequences, a lot of them will pop up to you like, oh, wow, I could play this on turn 2. But this doesn't actually help you do any of that. You still just play, a face-down creature on turn 3. And the interesting thing that I find is that you're actually still incentivized to do that because you've got this Carsey Deceiver on the board that is looking to help you flip that thing face up pronto. But again, the turn 3 play of tap my 3 lands and play my face down spell, just leave my Deceiver fallow is a little bit lame. Like I like sequences where you can envision playing a 2-drop that makes mana and then playing a big 4-drop a turn early. And, you can sort of start piecing these 2-card combos together. And this one doesn't really do that.
Well, you can play turn 2 Deceiver. Turn 3, you can play a face-down creature and play one of the come to play tap lands.
It's true.
We did it.
Broke it. But yeah, I think this card's going to be ultimately kind of in the middle part of the game, depending on how fast the format is.
Yeah, it's not the kind of card I would want to take very early, but, I could see, flipping a 5 cost or paying a 5 mana Megamorph cost on turn 4. That is exciting. So
yeah,
I think there are definitely decks that will want this card.
I think so too. Next one, another uncommon. And this is the one that you were alluding to earlier, Luis. It's called Warbringer.
Was it? I don't know. I didn't even know any of these cards until you just...
Yeah, right. I showed you these like a week ago. 3 and a red for a 3/3 Orc Berserker at uncommon. So as we say in the business, we've got a Hill Giant here, Luis. 3/3 for 4, is nicknamed a Hill Giant from the original 3/3 for 3 and a red. And, the fact that this one is an uncommon... And the fact that Hill Giants are fairly mediocre means that I expect pretty big things out of this card. And let's see if it delivers. First off, it's got dash. You can dash it in for 2 and a red. So if I came to you, Luis, and said, hey, new card from Dragons, 3 and a, it's a Hill Giant with dash for 2 and a red, what would your reaction be to that?
It's a time shifted Alicia's Vanguard.
Yeah.
Right.
in red. It's pretty boring, right?
It is.
Yeah, that's just not an exciting card. Like you said, we've got Alicia's Vanguard. That card saw very little play. And this is basically the same thing. Now, it's in a different color, which sometimes matters, but I don't think it does too much here. So, we have more.
I would hope so.
Yeah, this gets pretty interesting now. So, it says it has a static ability on it. So, anytime it's just sitting on the battlefield, dash costs you pay costs 2 colorless less. 2 colorless. That's a big discount.
This is another colorless mana saving, but 2 is in the realm of like playing 3 things per turn. So
right.
That's where you start saying like, maybe I can build around this. Like this can add essentially 4 to 6 mana if you dash out a couple other, expensive dash cards.
Yeah. Some of the obvious things that jump to mind are like Goblin Heel Cutter, right? You have a Warbringer out. You can play, for every red mana you have, you can play a Heel Cutter. Like you can dash in a Heel Cutter. And the crazy part is that that's actually sustainable. Like as long as your Warbringer lives, that could just be your plan. Like you don't actually need to have them on the battlefield at any point because the game would end if you had like two of those guys plus this thing on the battlefield. Another really cool thing about it is that you can dash it in for 2 and a red. Now it's sitting there and now you can start dashing in other stuff for the reduced cost. Remember, it will reduce each one by 2. It's not like the same thing as tapping to add mana or something where it's like, oh, you used up your 2 mana that you had. No, it's per card that you play. Now, the interesting question that Warbringer asks, though, is there such thing as a dash deck? Because so far there hasn't been.
Yeah, I would have to see, of course, the rest of the set to know that.
Right.
If you had just put this card into Fate Reforged, let's say, the answer would be no.
Mm-hmm.
One pack of the draft having dash cards, especially ones that are not at super high power level, means that you're likely not going to have a dash deck. But now we're talking about all 3 packs in the draft having dash creatures.
Right.
So that makes it much, much more likely. On another note, I also love the reminder text on this card. It notes that its ability is only active while this is in play. And I think that's a way to forestall the inevitable question, which is, wait, does this reduce its own dash cost? But
Right, of course. That's kind of funny.
This is similar to the, Obsidian Firehearts, the land continues to burn reminder text.
Yes. I do remember that.
It's not strictly necessary, but it's probably good to have.
Right. So Warbringer looks pretty cool. Again, it's asking an important question that we don't know the answer to yet, but we'll keep an eye on as we go through the set review and kind of look around. I think the other question we have for Warbringer is, like, how good is that even? Like, let's say that you had a creature, like imagine a Secret Plants deck from Khans of Tarkir, but instead of morphs, you had dash creatures. So you had, let's say, 8 dash creatures. This
is the build around, the central part for that.
What's the payoff?
Well, the payoff is this gets them dead really quickly. I mean, you mentioned Heel Cutter. Imagine you have 3 cards on par with Heel Cutter, which is very high power level.
Mm-hmm.
So you had like 1 Heel Cutter plus 2 of, whatever the new Goblin Heel Cutter-esque creature will be.
Okay.
You had a Warbringer and you had a couple Alicia's Vanguard level creatures that you do play because you're trying to get this deck going. If you dash out Warbringer, a Heel Cutter, and another 3/3 and you crack your opponent for 9, that costs you 5 mana. That sounds very powerful.
Right.
That does not sound bad to me.
Okay.
And it does not take very many turns of that before you just win the game.
Right. So it's a speed thing then. Basically, you're just saying that because you don't have a board state. Like if you do that, let's say that Warbringer's staying on the battlefield and the other ones are just you're dashing in, let's say 3 creatures from your hand, which sounds like a pretty dreamy scenario. You hit them for 9, but you're not developing your board. So they do get to keep playing out creatures and maybe even attack you with them, put yourself in a race, but you feel pretty comfortable that you could win that race with that many dash creatures.
Yeah, that specific example, I think, in most situations, hitting them for 9 there plus whatever you played before turn 5 is quite possible.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty good
The problem
spot.
is, it is, like you said, a sort of game plan that leaves you behind on the board. So if you hit them, let's say you hit them for 9 down to like 6 and you're like, all right, I'm going to kill them next turn. They attack you. Next turn you go dash, dash, dash. And then before you get to attack, they kill your Goblin Heel Cutter. All of a sudden you have 6 power. They still have 1 blocker left. You can't kill them, but your creatures are all disappearing in a turn anyway.
Yeah. See, it feels super
Then you just straight up lose.
Yeah.
So it's the sort of thing that it is good if it works. Very, very powerful. It is a bit risky, and I don't know if Warbringer justifies playing cards that aren't great by themselves. In this example, you're playing Heel Cutter, which is a great card, and Alicia's Vanguard, which is not. Whether that's worth it, I don't know yet. I'd have to see. I can't say that without seeing more cards. It does seem like you're not paying huge costs to play Warbringer. Like I said, Alicia's Vanguard is not a great card, but it's not such a bad card that I'm embarrassed to run it. I have put it in decks, and Warbringer is at the very worst in Alicia's Vanguard.
Okay. And that's what I was going to ask you next is just, well, if that's the case, then how low of it, like how bad do you feel about running an Alicia's Vanguard? And you said, okay, fine. Right. If there's this big upside, you can justify that. All right, cool. One more card to go.
And this is a card that, I feel like I'm going to play a decent amount of.
I think you would have played the hell out of this if it was in the previous format, right?
Yeah, we've got a Artful Maneuver, which is 1 and a white for an instant. It gives target creature +2/+2 until end of turn. So
pretty
kind
straightforward.
Of run-of-the-mill combat trick. Not super exciting, but definitely gets the job done if you need it. And it has Rebound. And Rebound adds kind of a whole new dimension. So the first time you use this, it will be as a combat trick. You attacked your 2/2 into their 3/3, or your 3/3 into their 3/3, or you blocked their 4/4 with your 3/3, whatever. You use it to win a combat. I think that's going to be above 90% of the time why you're going to cast this the first time. The second time, though, it comes back on your upkeep, and your opponent, clearly knows about it because it's just right there. So the second time, all it basically does is push damage through, which leads it playing out, very differently than a normal combat trick.
Right. So the second time, it's a lot worse, right?
Well, the second time you're not getting a free card out of it, or rather you're not trading it you don't get an extra card. It's not like a Stagger Shock. This is the white Stagger Shock, but Stagger Shock killed 2 things. This kills one thing the first time, and the second time maybe lets you do an extra 4 or 5 damage that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. But no, the second time, it's not like you artful maneuver a 3/3 and attack. They're like, well, better block with my 4/4 because it's already on the board. It's done.
Right. Now, how high do you rate a card? The card, let's just say it didn't have Rebound. We've seen cards like this. 1 and a white instant creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Often they'll give it a little bonus as well. But let's just say straight up, is that a playable combat trick in your mind?
It's not a great one. It's not one that I'm generally excited to play. It is a prowess enabler, so some prowess decks would be like, oh, I need another spell. But for the most part, that's the under the what I would expect to get. So
okay, so the Rebound's really important here. Then it's not just gravy for you.
No, the Rebound really does make it better if you want to attack them. So that you're not getting a ton of value out of the second part in a controlling deck, but a controlling deck's not playing Giant Crows to begin with. So I think this card is going to do a lot of good work for the decks that want the base level card, because decks that want Giant Crows are kind of interested in attacking your opponent for 5. And Artful Maneuver does that quite well. Actually, now that I think about it, the percentage that you use it to win a combat might be a little lower than a normal combat trick. Because let's say you have 2 prowess triggers, sometimes you use this to do an extra 4 damage this turn and a 4 damage next turn. Yeah. Sometimes you'll cast this even if you're not doing it to win a combat, just for pure damage. So that actually gives it, again, a little bit more depth than a normal combat trick.
Yeah, but look, man, I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but I don't think that you're going to have prowess decks. They're just not going to be a thing anymore. You're going to have random prowess creatures laying around, but I don't think you're ever going to have a deck that you're like, well, I made this sweet prowess deck anymore. It's just, there's not enough of it. You're only getting 1 pack.
Well, what if I pick up 2 Whirlwind Adepts, though?
Yeah, that's not happening either, buddy. I can't do this. I can't be the one to let you down. But yeah, so I think Artful Maneuver is going to be interesting because given the dearth of prowess decks they're just not going to be there. That means that this card has to stand a little taller on its own. It has to just be good enough on its own because you're not abusing it. And that's a big question. I think that this is the perfect slice of if you bump it in either direction, I think I come down harder. If you make it 3 mana, I'm like, nah. But if you made it, even something like +2/+3 or +3/+2, something like that, I would be like, yeah, and either way it could go. And I think this is going to be one that I could see falling on either side of the fence, since there's not going to be as many options for abuse. This one is borderline as far as how good it's going to be game in and game out, because of what you said before, Luis. It's not an impressive card just on its own. It really has to be something that you're getting a lot of value out of doing twice. I think another thing we're going to keep an eye out for is how aggressive is white. Yeah, right? If white's really aggro, then Artful Maneuver gets a lot better.
Yeah, and in a set themed with dragons and full of dragons, I don't know how much little combat tricks are going to be good. If most of the games revolve around these 3/3, 4/4, 5/5 flyers, that points towards, decks with small combat tricks not being the best, but who knows? I mean, we don't really know a whole lot besides the fact that there will be dragons.
Right. This could be the way you fight that, right? In the sense that you just power through a bunch of damage early.
And it could be that you have a bunch of good, solid 2/2 to 4/4 creatures. Then when they play their dragon, you just attack with everything and Artful Maneuver to take out their dragon. Then next turn, make your biggest creature bigger and attack with that. So that could be a way to combat.
How happy are you if this ends up being 4 damage to an opponent?
Most decks don't want 1 and a white or 2 mana, whatever, deal 4 damage. That's just not a playable limited card for most decks.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
But some decks want it. I think more importantly, it's an aggressive deck sometimes gets 4 damage, sometimes wins a combat and gets 2 damage, and sometimes gets more than that, because it's not just 4 damage. When you attack your 3/3 into their 4/4, and then when you give it +2/+2, make it a 5/5 and attack into their 4/4, you did 5 damage.
Totally.
Your 3/3 wasn't able to attack before that. So
it
didn't do an extra 2, it did an extra 5. 2 damage or 7 damage for 2 mana. That's more what you're talking about.
Yeah, I was trying to come up with maybe not the worst case scenario, but an average bottom case scenario where it's like, well, my flyer got pumped and I got in twice with it because of this. And but I think what you said is the primary use is going to be kill a creature with it in combat, hopefully, for the first one, and then either enable a big attack or get in for a couple of extra points of damage with the second. And again, it's just right down the line for me about how good that actually is.
Yeah, I think the actual worst case scenario is they kill your creature in response.
Yes, that is the bottom. Okay, so that's going to do it. Those were our preview cards. Some pretty cool stuff there. I don't think anything super groundbreaking, but some like the Warbringer certainly is one that, you should have your eye on as a potential card that could be abusable. And Artful Maneuver, it's one of those just question mark cards where it probably is good enough, but we'll see what we get around it. And then the Carsey Deceiver is a super interesting one that, like I said, I don't think it fits in perfectly with the strategy, but I do think that I could see a lot of utility from it.
Yeah, it's a little more niche. These other 2 cards are cards that you can slot into, I think, most decks. Warbringer obviously wants friends, but he doesn't need it strictly.
Right.
And Artful Maneuver just goes in most creature decks that, like to attack. The Deceiver, that's a card you have to build around. If you don't have the right deck, the card is quite bad.
Right. Okay, so that's it for those. One more thing that I want to talk about this week, Luis, before we call it a show and go into hibernation for next week's set review. Very cool.
So we are doing a set review next week.
We are, yes, confirmed. If you guys want to remind Luis on Twitter, sometime around Monday, Tuesday, that we are doing the set review, go ahead and do that. I wouldn't complain at all. Just don't tag me in it. Garrett Gardner, at Garrett APG on Twitter, did something very cool. He's a listener of the show, and I think a longtime listener based on the questions that he came up with, for an LR community survey. Now, this is a type of thing that I'm usually not interested in doing myself, because, how many surveys do you get asked in your email, and you're on a website and you buy something and then they follow up email? It's just like, I don't want to be another voice in that crowd of bugging our listeners, anytime that we don't have to. But that being said, he made this LR survey and put it on the subreddit, and then I tweeted it out and stuff because I thought, well, now this is actually just really cool. And he came up with a bunch of really interesting questions, and you can actually take the survey. I'll put the link for it in the show notes, and it's also on the blog on lrcast.com if you're over there. And we've got the results back. And at the time of recording, we were at almost 1,600 responses, which is a really nice sample size. And I wanted to go over a few of these, Luis. There was a couple that I wanted to go in depth on, and then just a few that I thought were kind of interesting and cool to relay to the listeners about the people who listen to the show. And I'm really glad Garrett did this, because I have been operating on a lot of assumptions for a long time about who our audience is and what they want. And based on the fact that the show seems to be serving that, those people, well, I've been thinking, okay, I'm on track. And for the most part, I've been pretty on about it. I have to say, my guesses were pretty good, but there was definitely a few things in here that I was like, whoa, this it's serves almost as a reminder, for you and I, Luis, when we're talking on the show about how we talk and who we're talking to not go too deep on references that they don't get, or, things that we're referencing from 5 years ago that feel like they were last year, but to other people, they're ancient history or things that never even happened to them in the world of Magic. And, so I want to go over a few of these. And the first one is one that I actually wanted to take a few minutes to talk about as well, Luis. It was, what is your gender?
Yeah. And we're actually going to, I think, move the sign off to here. We're just not going to, because this was what I was going to talk about for the sign off.
Yeah.
This is just going to get moved into the show discussion, because this was actually a suggestion even before the survey, which is to talk about the gender imbalance in Magic. And this seemed like a perfect time to talk about it. It's the first question, and it's the one with I find the most displeasing results. As of right now, it's 94% male. And
that's right.
That's not a number that I like to see, honestly. I would love if it was, well, closer to more balanced. I'm not saying that it's realistic for, Magic because it's traditionally been male dominated to hit that number like right away. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's a long way to go. I don't think that really anyone should be very happy that it's quite as imbalanced as it is.
Yeah, our listeners are currently 3% female.
Yeah,
and you know what? I think that reflects the Magic players in general. Like, I haven't actually seen the exact numbers on that, but I wouldn't expect this to be grossly out of whack with how that percentage goes, just of people that, play Magic regularly or whatever.
I actually don't know if that's true. According to Mark Rosewater, it was very, very different.
I know. I saw that, and I'm going to be honest, I just don't buy it.
I found that number shocking. I think what he said was 38%.
It was like high into the 30s.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the criteria was for their the analytics that they had. I'm actually going to talk to Mark about it next time I see him, just because I'm curious. I don't know if they can share that kind of thing, but I don't buy that. I wish at first I was very happy to see that number, because I was like, oh, that is fantastic. But then, I just think about it, and it's like, there's got to be something off with that. I would I understand that part of what I'm seeing is skewed because like a lot of it's at GPs, which are like a specific type of Magic player, a tournament oriented player or whatever. But man, can that really be?
Yeah. Well, like I was going to say, there's a couple kinds of, I think, selection biases going on here.
Okay.
One is that you and I, a lot of our live Magic events are Grand Prix or even PTQ, competitive scene. Like,
yeah,
we don't go to, first of all, we're not playing a ton of kitchen table Magic.
Right.
And those groups are hard to observe regardless. So, it's not like you can just go into random people's houses and see who's playing.
Right.
We also, I don't know about you, but I don't go to a ton of like Magic or conventions where Magic is being played, but Magic isn't the focus.
Yeah, not very often for me.
I would not be surprised if there more women were there than were at, say, a Grand Prix.
Totally.
And
that's a good point.
Also, the survey that we're getting was, first posted on the LR subreddit, which is even a much smaller audience than the actual total audience of limited resources. Right. Obviously, like we're passing through a couple different gates here, right, to get to where people are answering. We did try to spread it on Twitter, or hopefully people after this episode, we're going to get a lot more responses because people are listening to us talk about it and encouraging them to go answer the survey. The more responses we get, I think the more towards, accurate we're going to get in terms of analytics. But all these things, I think, push the ratio down. That I don't know if the ratio is 38% to 62% or what have you. And also, there are people who don't identify as male or female, and that's, that definitely should be counted as well. These are, the total player base, but
totally. And it was, on the survey, just to address that, there was other, and there was also the option to not answer any of the questions. So, yeah. If that didn't fit, your particular type, then you might not have just answered as well. So right. that also gets covered. Yeah.
Right. But I think most of the factors that would lead towards our interpretation of what the ratio is will push the ratio of non-male players down.
Okay. No, I think you're right.
And I think that's why you see that number of 38%. And I need to actually find the Tumblr post where he posted it to make sure we quoted the right number. But that's what I remember. And you think, wow, that's so far off than what I observe. And I think what you're observing is just a different world than what he's describing.
Okay.
My assumption based on that number that he quoted is that they're using some kind of analytics that measure people who identify as Magic players in some way, not people who have a DCI number, because those are completely different worlds.
Right. For sure. Yeah. Look, if that number is true, I am elated. I think that is fantastic. If those numbers are much higher than we thought. If that is the case though, so let's just say the number somewhere in between, right? It's probably above 3% of our listener base.
I would hope so.
Yes. And it might not be. I don't know, and then
I don't either.
Yeah.
This is the data we have right now.
Right. But it is probably above that for Magic players. And I'm going to say that it's probably below the percent that we were talking about earlier, but it might not be. And the real thing though for us is this is our show, Luis, right? And I want this show. I've always wanted this show to be as open to anybody as possible. My policy has been from the beginning and will continue to be. And this is just me personally. This isn't necessarily for the show. Like Luis, you have free reign to do however you see fit. My stance has always been to make sure that the show is open. I am not going to go out and, pander or ask people, oh, you're a woman, you should come listen to my show. Like I think that that's like borderline insulting. I just think that what should be the case is that if a woman or a transgendered person or anybody wanted to come listen to the show, that they wouldn't find things inherently occurring in the show that made them feel uncomfortable or made them feel like, I don't really want to keep listening to this, because I don't identify with it or because it's making me feel excluded. And so for me, and I try hard to make sure that we, don't go down those paths. Like this show, I mean, from the get-go was always going to be like that, but it was never meant to be some boys club nonsense. I don't tolerate that stuff on the show. I don't put that kind of stuff out into the world. I think that, you can be the way you want with your friends, but when it comes to, making a professional podcast that's aimed at, whose core idea is to help people improve at Magic and enjoy Magic more, keeping that as open as possible is what we want to do. So I guess, the one thing that jumps to my mind, Luis, about this particular gender one is just if there's anything that we could be doing that doesn't count as going far out of our way. Like I would never have like, oh, it's Women's Day on limited resources or something like that. That to me just feels pandering. It just feels like I'm striving or, trying to get some demographic. It just doesn't feel genuine. But again, if you are a woman and you're listening and you have found, anything that could change the show for you, that would make it more open. And if you're anybody who could give us feedback for anything, I'm always open to hear that. I am proud of where the show's at with that. I don't think that there's any big sweeping changes, but there's always room for improvement. And I don't like this number, Luis. Like I don't like seeing 3%. I like right now I'm staring at this thing and there's 1,500 males that responded to this survey and 52 women.
Yeah. And I largely agree with what you're saying, though. I actually think that you shouldn't limit it to the podcast. I think that when you say people should be how they want with their friends, I actually don't fully agree with that. I think you have and this goes for me too, completely. We are voices in this community, and I think we do have a responsibility that if we observe behavior that is unwelcoming or, something that you consider, regardless of who you're discriminating against or regardless of what you're doing that makes other people uncomfortable, I think you should say something. I think if you're at a local game store and someone, makes like a racist joke or a sexist joke or whatever, I do think that you have some responsibility to say something. And I really try to do that. And I'm not even claiming I'm perfect. And this is something that, I at this point feel comfortable to do that. But there have been times in the past when I just haven't spoken up, and the people who have good intentions but don't speak up really are part of the problem as well. If someone's doing something that makes other people there uncomfortable, within social norms, I think that it's tough to say what the dividing line is. Because clearly, if someone's offended by you making a joke about, an Elmer or something, that's not really that's not ground to stand on. But the people who are impacted by situations like this often don't feel that they have the power or voice to speak out. And you and I are people who do have that. And a lot of our listeners do too, especially if you're like, a white man, you have a lot more ability to say these things. It's more of the man part, especially in Magic. And I think that you really should say something. I don't think that I think by sitting and not saying anything, you're kind of enabling it. And that leads towards the kind of destructive environment that is my assumption that drives a lot of women out. And again, I can't speak fully to this because, as someone who has not faced really any kind of discrimination in Magic or really outside of Magic, it's not my place to say what exactly is happening that's causing this, but there is this imbalance. I mean, it's not for no reason, right? It's not just random that there's 94% men listening to this podcast.
No. So, and the truth is going to lie somewhere in the middle, as with all things. I found that tends to be the case in most scenarios, and it feels out of whack right now. It really does. I just don't like, I'm just looking at this 3% just going, what is going on here? But at the same time, there's going to be other factors that we're not fully considering here as well. Yeah. I'm not closed to the fact that there are things in this world that in the current state of affairs appeal to men more than they appeal to women. I have no problem saying that. I think that has become something that is taboo or something. And I'm like, but guys tend to like stuff like this more. And that I believe is true. The responsibility that I think that the guys who like this stuff more has is that if there are women who want to play, to make it welcoming, to make it a place where they can come play. And because I've heard horror stories from women who have gone to local game stores and had people be mean to them and just make them not want to go back. And I'm just like,
advances on them or make inappropriate remarks.
It's just like, what is going on with you? Like, the thing is, I'm very comfortable with activities, things falling, majority into gender situations. And the thing I'm not comfortable with though, is when those lines can't be broken. That to me is unacceptable. And I think that, we, as podcasters, as people who talk to the community, need to make sure that is clear. And I think that like, there's just no black and white about that. I think it's very clear that any woman who wants to play, anybody who wants to play Magic, period, should be able to in a comfortable, fun environment and have this be the escape. I mean, you got to remember that for a lot of people, Magic is how they get away from being tormented by people at school or feeling the pressures of their daily life or whatever it is. Magic is supposed to be the thing that you go to get away from that. Imagine if you were a woman and you went to a local game store and you found just more of that there. Right? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. And I think basically, shaming of any kind is just not something we should accept as a community. I mean, this again calls for basically anyone listening to this to hopefully do what they can, what you feel comfortable with. I'm not saying that if you feel uncomfortable speaking out that you need to speak out, but you really should think about it. Because if you don't, I mean, who's going to? If no one does, then it just happens. And like you said, it's not our job to sell Magic to people who don't want to play Magic, because Magic's a great game. It's the greatest game. We don't need to convince people who don't want to play Magic to play Magic. We need to make it so people who do want to play Magic get to play Magic without worrying about, other kinds of garbage.
Right. So hopefully you guys, the listeners, will take up that cause with Luis and I. It's something that I feel is very, very important. And again, I'd love to see more listeners of the non-male variety as well.
Yeah. And, if people want to talk about this on the subreddit, that'd be awesome. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, I mean, my email's, our email at lr@lrcast.com, or just email me, lsv@channelfireball.com. Just feel free to let us know what you think about this topic. If there's anything we could do better, if there's anything we should touch on. I'd like to hear it, because this is not stuff that, again, I can't claim to speak for a lot of the affected population here. It's just,
right.
I can make my assumptions, and I can, go based on what other people have said to me and what I've read. But as not one of the impacted group, I would love to hear those people's voices.
Cool. Let's move on to a couple of these other things. Some cool stuff. What is your age? And it looks like this one's not super shocking. The bulk of our audience, the vast majority, are in the 21 to 39 age group. Basically,
and you're still there, right?
I am. I am still there. In fact, you and I are both in that second to last, the 30 to 39 age group, right? Old guy?
Yeah, we are. In fact, that is.
Yeah. But I thought that was kind of interesting. Just that a lot of people think of Magic as like a kid's game or something, but like our listeners aren't, essentially, well, it looks like over 90% of them are 18 or older. So, or actually more than that, 97% of them. So
on stream, while we were doing the Vintage Super League, one of the chat asked me, "Hey, how long have you been playing Magic?" And I said, 21 years, because I learned how to play in 1994. Mm-hmm. And one of the people were like, "You've been playing Magic longer than I've been alive." And it's like, yep, that is. And when I see that, 18 to 20 age group, it's like, yeah, everyone in that group and below.
Yeah.
I literally learned how to play Magic before they were born.
It's crazy, right? And to even bring this into sharper focus, there was a Twitter discussion, and one of our longtime listeners, he's like, "I've been listening to LR for a quarter of my life."
Wow.
I'm like, oh my God.
That's absurd.
Yeah, I was like, wow. How how long total time have you regularly played Magic? And this one was kind of a mixed bag, but I will say that most of our listeners are in the year to 3 years range, and then up to 6 years. That's kind of the bulk of it. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Though the 7 to 15 has almost as many as the 4 to 6. So
interesting.
That is. I mean, Magic gets you. You really don't quit Magic. That is not how it works. And
totally
having a total of something like 60% or more than 60% of the people playing between 2 to 15 or rather a year to 15 years that's a long time.
Yeah, for sure. The next one was how long have you listened to limited resources? And this one didn't actually surprise me. This is kind of how I understood these things to work. The bulk of our listeners were from a few months ago up to 2 to 3 years ago. So, or I should say for a few months or up to 2 to 3 years. So, that's most of them. There's a few hanging on for 4 or 5 years, and even fewer since the beginning, the originals. And thank you, by the way, for everybody for hanging with us for so long. I think that's fantastic. But yeah, the most of them honestly are in like the Brian Wong era. Like that he's the one, that most people know as the co-host, since you're still the new guy, even though we're going on our second set review already somehow. But, but Brian was the one that the majority of our audience have listened to the most.
Yeah. And that actually, we'll touch on that later.
You bet we will. Also, people, the question was, do you generally play Magic on a computer or in paper? And this was a pretty mixed bag. Mostly paper, 47%, but 34% were a mix of both. And then 18% were kind of online only type players. And along those lines, another question was, do you play Magic online? And I guess I wasn't shocked by this either, but 68% of our audience does.
Yeah, which
a lot.
Which means that there's 16% of the primarily paper is my guess does play some Magic online. If you think that the numbers track.
Sure.
Because if you add the primarily online in a mix, that's 52%. But if it's actually 68% who plays Magic online, some of the primarily paper people still play Magic online, but definitely are paper dominated. But yeah, 68% is actually not that far away from what I would have guessed. It's people who like to draft, Magic Online is, I think, bar none, the best tool for getting lots of drafts in.
Yeah, it's just the best way to draft.
I mean, I remember when I, started to play Magic again, like I've taken some sabbaticals, as it were. Mm-hmm. And the Wednesday and Friday night drafts were the 2 drafts I did a week. And then I learned about Magic Online. It's like, I could do 15 drafts a week. And my world was never the same.
Yeah. See, that was my problem, is when I came back to the game, Magic Online was a thing. And it was just, that was it. Some MTGO specific questions for the people that answered yes to that were, what's your approximate rating on limited rating, on Magic Online? And well, the vast majority didn't know, which either speaks.
It's actually not that hard to figure out, right? Or not that easy to figure out, right?
No, it's kind of buried.
I had to have someone walk me through it. I'm like, I have no idea what my rating is.
Yeah, it's buried in the account.
Doesn't speak well for Magic Online to some degree.
No, it doesn't. I think it does speak to the fact that rating is kind of buried. I mean, it's not something that I think they want.
I guess it's not important, so it doesn't really matter too much.
But at the same time, it is kind of funny. But the spread was pretty even. A lot of them are in the 1650 to 1750 to 1799 range. That was kind of where it peaked up, but it has what looks like a pretty normal bell curve. It goes 1 1 2 2 5 7 9 9 5 2 1. It's just this sort of smooth curve upwards. Which is
kind of what ELO is supposed to do, right?
Yeah, I think so. So it looks like it's working. For me, I'm usually in the 1800 to 1849 range.
Wow, sick brags.
On average. Well, come on. I know yours is way higher than that, but I will go up into the 1850 to 1899, but I'm not a 1900 or more person. Unfortunately, I wish I was.
Actually, my limited rating right now is like 1780.
All right. So I'm way better at you.
Let's just say I did a lot of sealed in preparation for the last GP, and this is not my favorite sealed format.
Yeah, no, I've heard a lot of things. Here's a great one, Luis. I am so happy for this. When drafting, which tournament type do you prefer? And so, as you know, on Magic Online, you can either draft Swiss 4-3-2-2 or 8-4, and it's been sort of one of the things about this show from the very, very beginning, ironically, spearheaded by Ryan Spain, who now works on the Magic Online team and isn't quite as vocal about it on social media. But 4322s, as you may know as a listener, only reward 11 total booster packs of prizes, where Swiss and 8-4 will reward 12 total packs, making it virtually impossible to be better at 4322s than it is at 8-4 or Swiss. And even though Swiss doesn't allow you to kind of go infinite, it does give you the ability to get back on average more boosters than 4322s do.
And you always get to play 3 matches if that's what you want to do.
Which is a big deal. Yeah, it's a huge deal. I'm a big advocate for Swiss. I only play 8-4s these days myself, but when I started, I played Swiss a lot, and I think Swiss is fantastic. No shame in playing Swiss.
No, definitely not.
But if you do want the best competition, they do reside at the 8-4s generally. But anyway.
But you said you play 8-4s.
Only.
Okay.
Yes. I'm letting that sit. So some people like to mix it up, but of the ones that don't like to mix it up, 8-4s and Swiss accounted for 57%, and 4322s were 2%. 2%. Yeah. So that's great. Also, I'm trying to see if I can get these analytics to give me the names and addresses of the 38 people who play 4322 so I can hunt them down.
Well, what I don't get about the methodology of this survey, by the way, is that it doesn't add up to 100 because just not 100% of people answered the question. Is that the idea?
That's correct.
Okay. It almost would have been more useful of just the percentages of those who answered the question, but
probably. Yeah, we can talk to Garrett about it. He was working on getting.
I mean, this is a great thing regardless. So this is definitely not a knock on the survey.
My
first inclination was like, wait, why does this add up to like 60 or 70% or whatever?
No, yeah, and it is because people didn't answer, but that's actually really great. Garrett told me that he would like to rerun this again in about maybe 6 months or something. Give it a good breathing time.
At this point, this has enough momentum. People should answer this one.
Yeah, but he said, that if we have feedback, he'd be happy to take it and we could do some adjustments to it. And that seems to be one that would be good. A few more questions before we're done here. What type of player would you consider yourself? And the answers I thought were pretty good. Casual, competitive, just starting out, competitive, improving, but average. So, kind of on the upswing, but, they don't feel like they're really ahead of the curve yet. And then competitive, very experienced. And as you might guess, the majority of the people that answered are in the competitive, improving, but average mode. In other words, they feel like they can hang. They're not, they know the rules, they know how to draft, but they just are missing those key pieces and those concepts and sort of the consistency of it. And that's what they come here to listen for. But one thing that jumped out for me, Luis, and it's something we have to be really aware of, is casual. 414, that's 26% of the audience considers themselves casual Magic players. And, that's something that we have to keep in mind when we do the show, right? I mean, we like to go deep on these topics, but we have to remember that a good chunk of our audience, is somebody who's coming on to listen, to try to improve, but isn't necessarily trying to, tear down the tournament world or whatever.
Or they're listening because it's entertaining.
I hope not.
Yeah. Well,
you're not that funny.
Well, honestly, one of my worries when coming onto the show was I did not want to come off as like LSV Pro Tour competitor, just from that aspect, because I think that has its place. That is part of why people do listen to me and part of where I come from. Like, obviously it would be disingenuous of me to pretend I didn't play in Pro Tours and care about Pro Tours.
Right.
But I want to translate that to something that's useful to the people listening and entertaining also, because I don't want it to be too much, in-joke sort of stuff, which is easy to fall into. I certainly know the danger of that, while still broadcasting, of course, again, my authentic, personality.
Right.
Which is a bear on a bicycle.
Which is a bear on a bicycle that is telling in-jokes.
but we will get to that.
Yeah, we're almost there.
And so, again, this is something which I would love feedback on. I mean, you can send it to me, you can send it to LR account, you can post it on the subreddit. I read basically every post there. So I think that I want to use my experience playing Magic in tournaments in a productive way, in all senses, without it drowning out kind of what this podcast is about. Because I hope I'm doing that. I mean, I have the sense that I am, but I would certainly love to hear about it.
Yeah, that's good. I like that idea too, because that was my idea for you coming on. Is I love the idea of bringing, the mid-level normal LSV that I know, but being able to tap into that hardcore spike, Pro Tour competitor when needed, right? I wouldn't want that all the time, but man, having that ability to just sort of flip that switch on you and just let you go loose is great. And it's something that you're bringing to the show that none of our other co-hosts have been able to. We've had co-hosts that have been on the Pro Tour here and there, but nobody that's ever, had nearly the level of success that you have at the Pro Tour level. And that's something that I think that, it adds to the show. But I agree. If you did that all the time, it would be like, okay, Luis, like we get it, but you're talking over the audience's head like we're trying to talk about topics that are a little bit more accessible to a wider group. So I agree. Yeah. I'm curious to see if people have any feedback on that too. And be honest. We can take it. Yeah. You can be critical.
Yeah. I mean, especially I would rather hear good, honest feedback than, praise that you don't believe.
Right.
Of course, I'd rather hear praise that you do believe above both those.
Yes.
If you have good, honest, critical feedback about Marshall, we would love to hear it.
How many events do you attend both online and paper on an average week? Most of our listeners are between 1 and 2. With the bulk of them being either less than 1 or 1 and 2. So they draft every week or two, or they draft 1 or 2 times a week. Maybe they go to F&M. I think that's the F&M crowd for sure. Or people on a budget who are playing on Magic Online and can't just spew tickets like you and I just sit there for 15 drafts. But, a lot of times, you're a student, you're on a fixed budget. You can't just go online and just spew off a bunch of money. So you got to make each draft count. And, I think that that's a big portion of our audience too. It's not necessarily the grinder crowd. The 10 to 20 group was only 2%, and even 6 to 9 was only 5%.
Yeah. And another thing that I think might impact this is if let's say you're someone who, you have a job, it's not the cost that's keeping you off of playing more. If you only have X hours of Magic per week and you're listening to LR, that does take some of your Magic budget per week, as it were, your time budget. So I wonder how that impacts things.
Nah, people listen while they're doing the dishes, man.
That's true.
They're not taking like draft time to listen. I think that if, any rational LR listener, if given the choice between listening to us or doing a draft, would do the draft. We would be mad at you if you didn't. All right. How many Grand Prix have you attended? This is the other one that I kind of had earmarked as something that I thought was really interesting.
This one surprised me.
Yeah, it shocked me. And I think it's a good talking point as well. None is the biggest number, and it's huge. 56% of all the people that answered this said none. The next biggest group was 1 or 2 at 26%, and then it trails off sharply on the 3 to 5, 6 to 10, and 11 or more. I get it, right? GPs are a big step. They're expensive. Sometimes you have to travel for them, and they can be intimidating too. You might not feel like you're ready, etc. I don't care. Go to a GP. Go. Make it a thing. Well, these things have become these awesome destinations that are worth saving up some extra money to do or trying to make some extra time. You can plan out far ahead. You can, scrape together money with your friends and share a hotel room or drive or, do what you got to do. But I really do believe that GPs are just one of the coolest things that you can go to for Magic. And, if you just can't make it, of course I understand. But if any of these other things are problems in the sense of like, well, I'm nervous or I'm not ready yet, or I just don't know if I'd like the big tournament feel and all that stuff. There's so many other things going on at a GP that I think that it's totally worth trying out at least once to see if it's your bag. Even if, it doesn't end up being, or even if, maybe you're not a hardcore tournament player, there's just really cool stuff going on in GP. And I wanted to just take a moment to really encourage you to go do that. And I get it. Look, we're a worldwide audience, right? There's going to be a lot of people listening who are going to be like, yes, I would love to go, but there's never one within, even remote driving distance of where I live. And for you, I'm sorry, this is obviously not aimed at you. And I hope that we'll be able to get a GP close to you in the near future. They've been expanding the schedule and trying to branch out into other countries. And hopefully that's something that can happen. But if you are one of those people that has the ability to go to a GP, reasonably speaking, and you haven't, do it. You should definitely go. You won't regret it.
Yeah. Though honestly, it surprised me that 56% number wasn't greater. I was expecting more people to not have gone to a Grand Prix. So
yeah, well, look at the schedule now.
Yeah. But so I'm excited by this number. The action of going to a Grand Prix is a pretty big commitment, both in terms of time and financial, but also in terms of the step you take. I felt like it was a big step going to my first Grand Prix. I didn't go to my first Grand Prix until I had played Magic for about 9 years. So that was that was one of the first steps in my journey as a competitive Magic player. And
interesting.
It's still one of my fondest memories. I actually wrote a tournament report about it on ChannelFireball, my Grand Prix Anaheim report, because they had Grand Prix Anaheim in 2012. After that tournament, I wrote a Grand Prix Anaheim 2004 report. So
just a troll, but it was real.
Just because I wanted to talk about my first Grand Prix.
Oh, that's really cool.
It was a cool experience. I really would recommend you go. Grand Prix these days are also much, much better than they used to be. It used to be that Grand Prix were the tournament, and you went for the tournament and you prepared for the tournament. Now, there are plenty of people who go to Grand Prix and don't play in the main event, and that's completely fine. There's just so much more going on now than there used to be. These are Magic conventions. And like I said before, with regards to Vegas, regardless of whether you go to Vegas or what other Grand Prix, you can get a lot of that experience even if the main event doesn't sound appealing to you. There's just so much to do. So yeah. I think Grand Prix are pretty awesome. I would recommend going to them, but I think it's cool that, almost half the listeners have gone to a Grand Prix. That's pretty incredible to me. I thought it would be less than that.
I remember the first time I traveled to a GP. That was a big.
Well, that was going to Grand Prix Dallas in 2006, I think, or 2005. Yeah. That was the first time I got on an airplane to go to a Magic tournament.
Yeah, and that was a I was
just like, what am I
thing
doing?
For me. Yeah, I did too. I felt the same way. I felt like this is crazy. And now it feels normal because of work stuff. But even then, it's like, it is a thing that people do. Like, don't feel like you're out on a limb. It really is a thing. I remember, I didn't get to go to GP Seattle, the first one that came from after I came back to the game, because I had to go to like a musical or something. Like, it was just not ideal.
Was that in 2009 or something?
Yeah, that sounds right. Maybe 10.
It was a good top 8.
Were you in it? I have the feeling.
I don't remember, but
you were definitely in it. I didn't know that because I wasn't there, and I also didn't know who you were. But anyway, I did go to the next one, which was down in Portland, which was, it's only a couple hours from Seattle, so that one felt more like a local GP. And I remember thinking, oh, this was pretty cool. But then the real switch for me was when I got on an airplane and said, okay, I'm going down to a GP just to play the GP. It's not just a short drive that you kind of have to make if you're a Magic player in the area. It was like me deciding really to go travel for a GP.
Yeah, you're deciding this thing is worth your time and money.
Exactly. And then the next one I went to was Austin. And that's the one that I got to be in the booth for a couple of rounds and then met the coverage coordinator and then ended up taking the coverage job and haven't looked back. So yeah, traveling to GPs worked out pretty good. Oh yeah. This is a good one. Who is your favorite limited resources co-host? So the answers that were possible were Ryan Spain, the original co-host, John Laux, who replaced him, Brian Wong, who replaced him, Luis Scott-Vargas, who replaced him, or I can't pick a favorite. So that was he got a little steam valve there, the pressure release valve, just in case somebody felt a little too on the spot about picking somebody. And, number 1, Brian Wong, 38% of the vote. He got 600 votes as his favorite co-host. And then, interestingly, it kind of went how I thought it would. It went, you next, and then John Laux, next after that, which I'm sure is just tearing him up, by the way. He is just losing sleep over this. And I think it's great. It's really funny. And then poor Ryan Spain at 3%. It's really funny for me because, looking back on the show, like I know how these things work, right? They're going to vote for who's around. And if you look back to how long people have been listening, most of them have been listening for between 1 and 3 years. And if you've been listening for between 1 and 3 years, you've heard a lot of Brian Wong. And Brian was fantastic, right? He was great on the show. And, it's no surprise at all that people were super into him. I somehow found myself defending you on social media. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. You need defending. But I just said, to be fair to Luis, like you're still relatively new to the show. And, even then though, you still got like 30% of the vote, which is the second best and creeping up quickly. The one that really stood out to me though was poor Ryan. Cause Ryan is critical to everything that still happens on this show. The show straight up would not have ever started without Ryan. He's the one I co-founded the show with. A lot of, I'd say most of the framework for the show as far as laying down, the core concepts of the show, the ideas for how we wanted to push things came from Ryan. You know, him and I sat down and had a bunch of, you know, chats and stuff beforehand about the way we wanted things to go. Things like the vanilla test, best case scenario mentality, don't be Roddy. All of these things came from Ryan and, you know, with my help, but I mean, these were Ryan based things. And, it's sad for me that it's been so long since he's been on the show that most of our listeners don't even know who he is anymore.
Well, actually, looking on Twitter, Matthew Watkins, who you of course know, put up an interesting picture, which was it overlaid who your favorite co-host is and how long have you listened to the show. And basically everyone just picked as their favorite the person who was the first person they listened to.
Is that right?
It's very close to that. Yeah.
Oh, that's super interesting. I'm not surprised by that. That makes sense.
And so as, you know, as the person who hosted so long ago, not that many people who listened to back then are listening now to pick Ryan. Basically, the people who listened when John was on picked John. The people who listened when Brian was on, who was on, I believe the most recently and for the longest was Brian. Like he had the longest stretch in recent years because clearly he just stepped down. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then my guess is that a lot of people have started listening recently, also looking at how long have you been listening? Totally. And that would lead to why a lot of people are listening, you know, pick me. Well, also that, you know, I'm great. But
you are great. You know, it's funny. You brought up the duration on the show, and that's actually a contested topic between Brian, John, and Ryan. They all had similar runs that ended within like an episode of how long they were on. And it's like they, you know, so they'll come back and be like, did this guest appearance count? I beat John now. And so I'm not going to tell you what the number is though, because I want you to far exceed it.
All right. I'll ask you every week if we're still doing this LR thing.
Oh, I know you will. You're very consistent, if nothing else. All right. The most important question for last, Team Elmer or Team Shelley? Now, it's kind of funny because the questions aren't entirely, there's another one thrown in. So we've got Team Elmer, Team Shelley, Team Bear Anna, and we're editing this to bicycle. And then the best answer, I don't know what this is. And God bless you, 10% of the people that said, I don't know what this is.
Yeah, so to go back to my team, the Team Bear on a Bicycle, the reason it's not Bear on a Unicycle is according to an intrepid listener whose Twitter name I no longer know, unfortunately, but you know, good on you, the person who pointed this out. Bears can't ride unicycles. Their physiologic makeup does not allow this. So, after doing some extensive YouTube research,
do this. I keep thinking of this stupid video.
And this is exactly what we were watching as we were trying to start the show. Yeah. Of bears riding bicycles, including one somewhat grotesque one where a bear and a monkey do a bicycle race, and then the bear eats the monkey at the end of the race. So I guess the bear won the race.
It's so
Why are you
horrible.
laughing? That's terrible, Marshall.
It's so bad. I was watching this video with Luis before we started the show. We were both laughing so hard I could barely start the show going. And then like 2 different points we're talking about like preview cards that I can picture this stupid bear bearing down on this poor monkey on the bicycle.
Yeah, it's incredible. But
it's terrible.
Basically, I have to switch. Bear on a unicycle has to become Bear on a bicycle. So
Bear on a bike.
And I've tentatively named the bear Harold. Someone actually, I believe, suggested on Twitter as well, and it actually sounded good.
That's a good name.
So Harold is now your new mascot.
So you're Team Harold?
I am Team Harold. I'm switching from Shelley. Shelley never really spoke to me. It's too crabby, I guess. But I'm going to go with Team Harold. That's Bear on a Bicycle. And for those who don't know where that came from, that's what I described the inside of my opponent's heads being, is when they're taking too long to make a play, when they're just sitting there, all I can do is imagine them thinking about Harold on, riding his little bicycle with a fez on in a circle. And that really stands in for basically anytime someone's not doing something productive, they're just thinking about the bear on the bicycle.
Old Harold. It's funny. I don't want this to become a thing, but I know it will. This is the same thing that Brian did. He just made a joke, and then all of a sudden I'm signing, random crab cards from the past or whatever at a GP. So I will say though, and this is important, Team Elmer won that one, and it wasn't close. 47% for Team Elmer. The original mascot, the original unofficial
Team
mascot.
Is just getting started. I'll let you know that.
Yeah, you did. And Team Harold beat Shelley.
Yeah.
Which is like, it shows how little these things hold for people. It's just, I mean, we didn't even name him yet. And they're already beating, this staunch Team Shelley who's been around for a long time. And Brian is not going to be like, he must have been pretty happy to see that his favorite co-host spot was still intact, but he is not going to be happy about Team Shelley getting beaten by Harold here.
Team Harold beat Team Shelley like it was a monkey on a bicycle.
I mean, crabs definitely can't ride bicycles. So anyway, Team Elmer for life, though. That I took the survey, by the way.
I did too.
Sometimes I listen to the show, and I picked Team Elmer. I know what you took.
I picked Team Harold.
All right, that's going to do it for the show this week. Remember, this podcast is brought to you by ChannelFireball.com, where you can check out a whole bunch of awesome free content every day, basically. I mean, there's new stuff all the time on there, articles and even videos from the top players in the world and sometimes me. And also the Patreon. We have a Patreon account. I don't like going too crazy about the Patreon, but it is there. It does exist. If you've found value in limited resources and would like to give something back to help support the show, you can do that at the Patreon. You can find the link on lrcast.com or in the show notes. It's very easy to do. You can pick any amount you want. It charges you whenever a show comes out, and you get some pretty cool perks associated with the Patreon as well. So that's something that just helps out. Fully optional, though. No pressure to do it. It's just if it's something that some people had asked for, and if you'd like to do that, you know where to find it. To find us, you can find me on Twitter, Marshall_LR. Luis is also on Twitter at LSV. And you can hit us up there the easiest if you've got something a little bit beefier to talk about, or something maybe that you would rather not talk about in public. We do have the email address that Luis mentioned earlier on our more important topics, like the gender and magic thing and that kind of stuff. LR@LRcast is where you can find, LRcast.com is where you can email us. Luis and I both see the emails from that whenever they come in. So you can go ahead and do that as well. Luis, no sign off this week. You already did it. You kind of shoehorned it into the middle of the show, but that was a good fun show. And next week, set review for Dragons of Tarkir. You won't want to miss it. We'll see you then.